So when Blanche realizes that, of course, these doctors that have come to collect her, and this doctor and this matron that have come to collect her from the Kowalski residence are not Mr. Shep Huntley. The key thing here is that she seems at some point to actually believe her own fabrications, and it's important here that again the Vasuviana becomes the sound commentary. Stella stares back at Blanche. Eunice is holding Stella's arm. There's a moment of silence, no sound but that of Stanley steadily shuffling the cards. And I think this shows us, that the machinations of fate. That fate is operating here in a way that is completely taking the side of Stanley. Blanche catches her breath again, slips back into the flat. She enters the flat with a peculiar smile, her eyes wide and brilliant. As soon as her sister goes past her, Stella closes her eyes and clenches her hands. And I think there's a real sense here of tensing up for the almost the violence of this particular moment from Blanche's perspective. But also, she can't quite confront the reality herself here and has to alter her own vision. I think, again, there's possible overlap there with Stanley and the birthday party, and the connotations of the loss of vision and confronting reality. A little further down, Blanche stops just inside the door, and Mitch keeps staring down at his hands on the table, but the other men look at her curiously. So I think, Mitch seems to be sort of transfixed and concentrating very, very hard on not acknowledging Blanche, not acknowledging the destruction that he now has played some role in order to alleviate his own guilt. At last she starts around the table towards the bedroom. As she does, Stanley suddenly pushes back his chair and rises as if to block her way. So again, the domination of physical space is just like the way that McCann and Goldberg dominate that seating arrangement in the birthday party. Stanley says, "Did you forget something?" And Blanche shrilly says, yes, I forgot something. She sort of pounces on this opportunity. And then it seems to be at breaking point. The thread of her existence seems to be unraveling here. She rushes past him into the bedroom, and lurid reflections appear on the walls in odd, sinuous shapes. And again, this Vasuviana is filtered into weird distortion, accompanied by the cries and noises of the jungle. So again, what we have here is a mixture of sound, staging, and lighting, all coming together to offer this kind of critical commentary on savagery. And I think that clearly connects to this moment of Goldberg's loss of eloquence in the play, where we see into that kind of naked savagery of human existence. We have the lurid reflections in the lighting. We have this terrifying suggestion from the lighting. And then the music filtered into weird distortion. The Vasuviana now is even going to a point where it's not just the sense of trauma, but it's distorted into madness, and is accompanied by cries and noises of the jungle, of wild, primitive civilization dominating. Stanley says, "Doc, you better go in. Nurse, bring her out." The matron advances on one side, Stanley on the other. Divested of all the other softer properties of womanhood, the matron is a peculiarly sinister figure in her severe dress. Her voice is bold and toneless as a fire bell. So there's, I think, the sense of institutional blandness in the matron's figure that mirrors, I think, Stanley's appearance once he's been converted in the birthday party. But again, the toneless as a fire bell here is this kind of dangerous warning that I think captures, I think, similarities with Goldberg and McCann. They have this sort of sterile inauthenticity because of their institutionalized blandness. The greeting is echoed once the matron says, "Hello, Blanche," and re-echoed by other mysterious voices behind the walls, as if reverberated through a canyon of rock. And then the echo sounds in threatening whispers. So there's this, I think the sound effects here are supposed to create that subjective content of Blanche's mind and the loss of reality that her mind is unraveling, and that we hear that through the sound effects that Williams creates for the dialogue here. So dialogue and sound effects become one, and that I think creates this sort of surrealist nightmare effect in terms of the representation of Blanche's consciousness. He said, "What did you forget, Blanche?" And she just says, I, and this inarticulacy again, she cannot now formulate a story, and that mirrors Stanley gargles towards the end of Act 3 of the play. And Matron says, "It doesn't matter, we can pick it up later." And again, that mirrors Stanley in the birthday party. That there's this, I think, the way that Petey attempts to sort of protect him by saying he's going to go out and look for his peas. He I think, creates a story that's designed to be protective here, but her story, the matron's story, is designed to trick Blanche into this sinister kind of self-destruction. And Stanley says, "Sure, we can send it along in the trunk." So there's this kind of, again, the hatred for her illusions and in her costumes. And again, she retreats in panic. "I don't know you, I want to be left alone, please." And then the echoes rising and falling, "Now, Blanche, now, Blanche, now." And again, this is the first time we've had a kind of an alternative, a sort of sound effect represented as a character. And again, that shows us the degeneration of Blanche's consciousness. Stanley says, "You left nothing here but spilt talcum and old empty perfume bottles, unless it's the paper lantern you want to take with you. You want the lantern." So again, he resents these illusions and says that the only thing that she's left here are these sort of the spilt talcum and old empty perfume bottles, these signs of her fabricated self-presentation that he wants out of the flat. But I think, his limitations and cruelty are extremely evident here. But that's all her effect has been. Crosses to the dressing table and seizes the paper lantern again, violent treatment of this symbol of her illusions, tearing it off the light bulb and extends it towards her again. This becomes a kind of physical enactment of the violent violation of her body that he's carried out in between the two scenes. She cries out as if the lantern was herself, and again that sort of metaphorical or symbolic equivalence is made explicit there. All the men spring to their feet. So here, this is the sort of the opposite of a polite gesture. We've got this sinister moment where they're always kind of stage an intervention here, and that their moment of springing to their feet, which she was expecting as a polite kind of demonstration of their chivalry, becomes a moment of their kind of complicity in her destruction. Now, Stella can't quite handle the trauma here. Don't let them do that to her. Don't let them hurt. Oh God, oh please God, don't hurt her. What are they doing to her? What are they doing? She tries to break from her arms. "No, honey, no, stay here. Don't go back in there. Stay with me and don't look." She has to shift her vision because the reality is too shocking. She cannot see reality clearly in order to go along with this story. And this is such a clear connection with Stanley in the birthday party. He is forcefully attacked by the institutions of power because he cannot go on seeing reality in its true light, because he is an existential threat to their inauthentic status. And here, the central difference is that this is willfully controlled in the people whose vision is changing. Stella's vision is the one that's changing, and she is actively deciding to do this, whereas Stanley has his vision transformed, in that kind of sinister, euphemistic language. He is violently transformed in terms of his vision by others. Una says, "You've done the right thing, the only thing you could do. She couldn't stay here. There was no other place for her to go." And so this simplistic diction, I think, mirrors the views that are in triumph here. You've done the right thing, the only thing you could do. The thing that has been done is right because it is the only pragmatic choice. That morality is no longer part of the equation of ethics. The right thing to do here is correct from an ethical perspective purely because it's the only pragmatic choice. And so we have this sort of divorce of pragmatism and ethical thinking from each other at this moment in time that shows us that triumph of kind of materialistic pragmatism that this play, I think, represents. Stanley runs in from the bedroom, panicking, and I think there's this kind of bizarre reversal of the rape scene here. You know, that he panics and runs away from the bedroom. And the doctor says, I always like to avoid it. You know, the doctor itself, you know, perhaps because the doctor is in tune with reality, he is the person who is responsible for reality, he deliberately decides not to confront this. And this, you know, brings to mind the suggestion of Goldberg and McCann's Monty, you know, this supposed doctor that they promise they're going to fix Stanley with because of his nervous breakdown, his mental degeneration. Pablo says this is a very bad thing. This is no way to do it. She should have been told, Madre de Dios, Mother of God, this is bad, very, very bad. So that even the men here, you know, these kind of blue-collar guys are all reacting to this with a great sense of empathy. Mitch starts towards the bathroom and Stanley crosses to block him. So this huge sense of conflict here between Mitch and Stanley shows us how Stanley has ultimately driven this tragic fate for Blanche. Mitch wildly says, you done all this, all of your goddamn interfering with things, you know, and the fact that it's all of his goddamn interference shows us the conscious control that it has inflicted over this and how much this has been a personal mission for him to destroy Blanche. And then he just says, quit the blubber, and pushes him aside. Mitch says, I'll kill you, and he lunges and strikes at Stanley. And then he just doesn't even take him seriously. Hold this boneheaded crybaby. Stop it, Mitch. Yeah, take it easy. So in the end, you know, Mitch is also on the side of, you know, those individuals who are too fragile for this crude reality, and he sides with Blanche here. He collapses at the table sobbing, so he acknowledges the cruelty of this action. I think it redeems him as a character. And during the preceding scenes, the matron catches hold of Blanche's arm and prevents her flight. Blanche turns wildly and scratches at the heavy woman, pinions her arms. Blanche cries out hoarsely and slips to her knees. It's extremely violent, sort of in figurative terms here, that she's forced into this degeneration by these figures of institutional power. And then the matron just says the fingers have to be trimmed. So she's going to be, you know, sterilized effectively of her power, made impotent and blunted as an individual. And the doctor says, not unless necessary. So there is this kind of very slight sense of softening kind of optimism from the doctor. He prefers not to be the kind of violent enforcer, so I think the doctor is probably more in line with Goldberg than McCann. But I think both Goldberg and McCann have a very sinister, violent streak beneath the surface. He takes off his hand and now becomes personalized, so he becomes the kind of reverse here of the matron. The inhuman quality goes, so he becomes an individual. His voice is gentle and reassuring as he crosses to Blanche and crouches in front of her, so he adopts this passive body language. And then he speaks her name, her terror subsides a little, and the lurid reflections fade from the walls, the inhuman cries and noises die, and her own hoarse crying is calm. So all of the sound here is suggesting to us, Williams' use of sound is suggesting to us that the doctor is providing some kind of human face at a very final hour of need. But this posture is what Blanche recognizes as real. You know, he is performing a role here of a kind of humanizing, chivalrous gentleman, and it's precisely this performance that Blanche has insisted is reality throughout the play, and it's this wicked irony that the only time she experiences chivalry is when someone from a mental institution is here to come and take us away. So there's this enormous ironic use of sound here that creates this great sense of irony about Blanche's connection to chivalry and polite manners. And this, I think you see as she stares at him with desperate pleading, she identifies this connection. Blanche faintly says, ask her to let go of me, and the matron releases her. Blanche extends her hands towards the doctor, who draws her up gently and supports her with his arm and leads her through the portiere. So the stage directions here, I think, are very deliberately constructed to suggest the chivalry that she's been looking for. He draws her up gently and supports her with his arm and leads her. You know, there's this sort of chivalrous body language going on here. She's really only reliant upon the values and the demeanour of these values, rather than where this supposed chivalry is leading her. She holds tight to his arm. Whoever you are, I've always depended on the kindness of strangers. So there's this huge sense of irony here, and that this kindness of strangers that she refers to at this moment in time is something that is ironically taking her away from her life and imprisoning her and limiting her. So this kindness of strangers, we are shown, can't be trusted. This is not something that we should have faith in, and that this is part of her downfall. In an element, this is maybe perhaps her martyr. The poker players stand back as Blanche and the doctor cross the kitchen to the front door. She allows him to lead her as if she were blind. So there's a sense of female passivity again, right up until the last. And as they go out onto the porch, Stella cries out her sister's name from where she's crouched a few steps upon the stairs. She shouts Blanche and walks on without turning. So Blanche realises the stranger is a safer bet here in her own mind. She can't trust her own family, and in the end turns upon strangers for their kindness. But that kindness involves the destruction of her identity and her quite literally her sort of excision from society. Blanche walks on without turning. Eunice descends to Stella and places the child in her arms. It's wrapped in a pale blue blanket. And so there is this suggestion of tranquility that happens. It is tranquil because Blanche is leaving. And the child is this symbol of rebirth and of the new dawn, I think. Stella accepts the child, and this is the birth of a new dawn, of American reality. Eunice continues downstairs and enters the kitchen where the men, except for Stanley, are returning silently to their places about the table. Stanley has gone out on the porch. Here he is surveying his kingdom again and stands at the foot of the steps looking at Stella. A bit uncertain, he still can't quite tell whether he has her connection and loyalty, but she sobs with complete abandon. And there's something luxurious in her complete surrender to crying now that her sister is gone. So she's, I think, embracing this emotion, I think, is a way of atoning for her guilt and sort of allowing her sort of authentic feeling to express itself for the first time. And here, Stanley's voluptuously and soothingly treats her, so he becomes indulgent. He doesn't really do anything voluptuously throughout the play. At this moment in time where he realises that Stella is traumatised by this new reality but has nevertheless accepted it. He kneels beside her and his fingers find the opening of her blouse. So we've got this unbelievably inappropriate kind of sexual connotation here. He adopts this submissive posture, but the sexual connotation here is re-established, that sexuality and pure carnal desire is the norm that is going to define reality. This is now love, now love. This tenderness is purely because of his victory, and it is again based on physical sexual desire. The luxurious sobbing, again, sense of indulgence in this. The sensual moment fade away under the swelling music of the blue piano and the muting trumpets. There's again a deliberate sexual connotation to this, and the sounds of reality once again becoming prominent. And the game is 7-card stud. We are re-established in reality where dominance and gambling and posturing are the norm. And it's not a coincidence that we have this card, this 7-card stud that is based on, is a mixture of only revealing some of your hand, and of being, of offering a vision of reality that is compromised. And so there's a huge irony in this very final curtain line that that shows us that everyone's vision of reality is in some way limited, and that we are all forced to shroud parts of it. And it's simply a case in this play that the forces of history and the forces of society are driving a vision of reality that also has its limitations, standards, but that is ultimately based more brutishly on raw, rugged and naked power. And I think this invites a comparison to Meg's delusion at the conclusion, because it's alienation and distance that is the norm that is being re-established in the birthday party. But here it's virulent sexual passion that is being partly re-established as the norm.